Welcome back to the second part of our individualization deep dive. This is the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. My name is Brad Nadalt. We've got the coach Lindsey Parry with us once again. Last week we went super deep into lever one, which was consistency. If you're joining us and you haven't listened to that one yet, I'd suggest go back, listen to that first, and then come back to this one. If you joined us from that, welcome. It's good to have you back. Lindsey, let's dive straight into things and into lever two of this individualization deep dive, and that is structure. And this is all about training smarter and not harder as we turn 50. And let's talk about why structure is so important when it comes to improving your performance after the age of 50.
Yeah, so Brad, it's because it's so strongly tied into this process of allowing yourself to recover more. On the last week's pod, what I did allude to a little bit was strength training. We hadn't quite looked at its role because most of the stuff we've been focusing is like the short-term things that can lead to improvement of consistency. But the structure plays a really important role because that's what sets us up for the longer term success. Okay. The important thing in a structure is it needs to allow us opportunities to load, and it needs to allow us opportunities to recover from that load, because one of the things we said was that recover, you cannot improve from the training that you do not recover from. So recovery allows you to improve from the training that you've done, and that is what the structure does. And then in terms of the bigger picture, long-term improvements, and winding back the clock a little bit, so to speak, is that strength training will play an important role in that. And so we've got these elements that we need to balance around. We have to improve our strength because it's one of the biggest things that we lose as we are getting older. We do need to do some work. And there mustn't be a misconception there that just because most people have been putting the emphasis in the wrong direction doesn't mean that we mustn't do work to address our strengths and weaknesses. But then where is that work placed relative to each other? And I think the two biggest components that we have to kind of look at to give ourselves time to recover from are the higher intensity session, which is really important as we get older in terms of helping us to maintain our body's ability literally just to move fast. Okay, so there's this very strong neural component to doing speed work as we get older, but there's also the physiological component that's tied to that. And then there's this need to obviously maintain and build endurance that we will do in the longer run. And so those are probably your two biggest hits of load from a running point of view in the week. And so we kind of want to keep those two separated. And how we set the week up is so that we can keep those two apart from each other and we can allow recovery between those. And then it's about getting the intensity of the rest of the runs right in the week so that we can allow that recovery to take place between those. And then obviously, where do we put the strength training in? Because the strength training is just so important in terms of how we can maintain this. And the one thing that when I was talking in the last episode about the funnel, Brad, and how we kind of lose people in this funnel for all of these reasons, the one thing that can help to stop that funnel is the strength training. And I think what's key right now, and I think is going to become more and more important going forward in the future, is this focus in the older population around healthy living or living well, or I don't want to use the word longevity, but the buzzword is
Health span.
health span. Thank you. And strength training just plays such a key role in that. And if you do introduce the strength training, then we don't have to have the same funnel effect, because we can, in essence, stay younger for longer by introducing strength training.
All right, let's talk the actual practicalities and what an optimal week of training would look like for a runner over 50 who wants to maintain speed or improve speed and endurance.
Yeah, so for me, what that looks like is a Saturday or Sunday long run, because that is, even when we are older and retired, etc., we still tend to have more time on the weekends. And so that's the main reason for me still preferring the Saturday or the Sunday to do that longer training run. And then on the other day of the weekend to do a shorter, easier run. But of course, there is some flexibility on that run depending on how much more time you've got on the week. And then based on that run, I will then look to place the high intensity session. So my bias has always been to a Tuesday, but that's a very personal bias for me because I typically tend to do my long run on the Saturday. And so then by Tuesday, I've had a lot of time to recover. However, Wednesday and Thursday are pretty good options, particularly if you're doing a Sunday long run. Then Wednesday or Thursday works quite well there. And then on the Tuesday, possibly doing something quite a lot easier. Then, of course, the other two runs, once we've got, let's call it Saturday and Tuesday, the other two runs become quite easy because they could either be a Thursday, Friday, or a Thursday, Saturday. And that's my preferred structure for runs for 95% of the population. If you what we call a 5%er, then perhaps a fifth day of running could come into play there. And if you're a 1%er, which is to say that in relative terms, if there was an Olympics for 50-year-olds, you would be in the Olympics and making the final. There is room for 5 to 6 days, but then we just got to be super careful about what you do on what day and the intensity that you do those at. So yeah, we like to talk to the vast majority, and so that would kind of be my long run Saturday or Sunday, intensity sessions Tuesday or Thursday works well, and then a lighter mobility / strength session on a Monday, and a harder strength session on a Wednesday, and then maybe another strength session on a Thursday, depending on how your life looks. And then there is still room for the odd swim and cycle in there.
Yeah, I was going to ask a little bit about the strength and how to fit them in, and whether it's low intensity, high intensity. And we often talk that 3 is the ideal, but 2 is better than 1, and 1's better than none. In the optimal sort of way to do this, how many strength sessions should we be doing? And then because if you are doing 3 and you're running 4 days a week and you're taking a full rest day, obviously there will be days where you're doing a run and strength training. How do you get it that you're not doing a hard strength session on a hard run session day?
Yeah, so typically on my Saturday long run example, I will have Monday as a strength mobility core, let's call it band work strength session. So we're still doing strength. We're working on the smaller intrinsic muscles. We're working on the stability, which is so important for helping with the running economy. But we don't want to do a really hard strength session because that will then compromise Tuesday's high intensity session, and it puts you at risk of hurting yourself. And then, of course, on Wednesday, post the higher intensity session, it is then okay to do that hard strength session. And we do need to do some heavy lifting. We do need to get stronger. But then that opens us up for doing a really nice, easy run on the Thursday, which will contribute to the aerobic process. Also helps us to recover a little bit from that strength session. And then often I'll do another strength session on that Thursday, but with a different focus to what Wednesdays was. So we're not working the same muscles hard 2 days in a row. And then that leaves Friday as a full rest day, which again, for me is like really great in terms of mental freshness, as well as allowing the body to heal up really nicely before I tackle my long run on a Saturday.
I love that, Lindsey. Then you spoke a little bit about sort of build and recovery weeks as opposed to the nitty-gritties of per week. Are there any specific training cycles or periodization sort of methods that work best for runners over 50?
Absolutely. And so again, and we've found particularly with males versus females, there's a little bit of a difference. And then certainly as we get older, there's a little bit of a difference. So in our early 50s, if we get the structure right, then it still works quite well to have this sort of 3 week increasing training load, much like we do in traditional mesocycles, and then with a recovery week in the fourth week. So I still find that that works pretty well for most people through their 50s. In females, we often find that a 2 week loading with a 1 week recovery works better. So those are 3 week mesocycles. And so that also tends to extend the kind of training, particularly into a marathon. So 12 weeks, if you are consistent in training well, 12 weeks works quite nicely for males in their 50s to get into a marathon. And then females in their 50s, a 15-week cycle seems to work quite well. And then as we go along and we get older, 50s, through the 50s into the 60s, and particularly into the 70s. And Brad, this again is where the individualization comes in and is so important, is that during that time, depending on the level of fatigue that you can feel building up, depending on how difficult it's starting to feel for you to get to your sessions, plus living life. Because let's be honest, at 75, you can train yourself quite hard and then spend most of your days lying on the couch. Okay. But that's not what we want. We want to carry on living life and living it well. And so if you do find yourself spending a lot of time having to just be still and recover from all this training, then going on to a 2 week load, 1 week recovery cycle can really be beneficial.
Brilliant. I love that. Lindsey, let's jump into lever number 3 now. And this is all about tailoring your training for maximum results. And this is like where the real individualization comes in. How can runners over 50 identify what they need in their training? Like, what is it that they need to work on? Or like, so that they're not just following a plan that has worked for someone else?
Yeah. So this takes us now right back into what are your strengths and weaknesses? And are those actual strengths and weaknesses or created strengths and weaknesses through, let's use the word neglect, for lack of a better word? Okay. Now, in order to determine if it is potentially a genetic strength and weakness, what we can do is analyze how we did when we were much younger. Okay, so if you've been running since you were a teenager, if you've been running in your 20s and 30s, have a look at your short distance times, what those predict for you for the longer distances, and then try and see how your actual performance in the longer and the shorter distances went. And so, what you will typically find is two types of running. You will get people that, in relative terms, they could run an 18-minute 5K, but their best marathon was a 3:30. So we can look there and go, wow, they never got anywhere near their times as in the marathon to what they were capable of when we looked at the 5K. Or you'll get someone like me that's got a 2:45 marathon, but only has an 18-minute or 17:32 best for 5Ks. And you can look at that and go, well, this guy's never reached his potential at the 5K, but it wasn't for lack of effort. It's because I'm so much more suited to the marathon distance than I am to the 5K. So that immediately then gives us an indication of, okay, well, I am stronger at this aerobic component. And so I do want to focus on my strengths and make sure that I stay strong in that department. But as I get older, my weakness is going to hold me back even more than it did when I was younger. So what do I do about that? Okay. Some of it is linked to strength training, but some of it is now I actually need to prioritize that training. And where when I was younger, especially once I realized that I just don't respond that well to that kind of training is that I would avoid it a little bit, and I would do more kind of tempo type of workouts rather than proper speed workouts. But as I'm approaching 50, that's going to become detrimental because my coordination is going to suffer for it. When my coordination starts to suffer, my efficiency is going to suffer. And then ultimately that is going to impact when I'm going longer. So I need to put on a focus on doing more shorter, harder interval types of work, adding running drills into my training plan, doing things like strides and run throughs. Okay. Whereas somebody was better on the 5K, but now as they've gotten older, maybe their focus has shifted to a half marathon or a marathon. How are they going to balance those scales? Or what they'll probably also find is that because they've done better at short, they probably enjoyed short more, so they probably had an over-reliance on high intensity work in their training plans. When they've done their longer work, they've probably run it a little bit too fast and maybe haven't done enough of it. And so you need to change the focus of your training. Keep the high intensity stuff there because you do respond well to it, but maybe reduce the volume and frequency, and then look to address this endurance kind of issue that you've got. Now, if you don't have the luxury of being able to go back and look at what you used to do and how you used to do it, it's like, what sessions do you thrive off? Okay. And this is so incredible about the human body, is that if we take a step back and we listen, quiet out the noise, and we listen to our bodies, it often tells you exactly what or where your strengths and weaknesses are. So if you thrive off and enjoy the shorter, high intensity stuff, and even though you knackered when you do it, in the days afterwards, it almost feels like it gives you a little bit of energy, then you know that you fall into that group of probably better over the shorter. We must do some of it, but we've got to be careful not to do too much. And by the same token, if you just love being outside and being on the go for 3 hours, and that kind of fills your tank and makes you feel good and puts you in a good mood, but you really suffer on the short, it's the other way around. Then you're more like me. It's something we have to make a concerted effort to work on. And I think that's how we get what we need to work on, Brad. But in terms of the specific individualization of how we execute, that's got to come in from doing a fitness test like a 5K or something similar, so that we can just make sure that we get our structure right, but that in that structure we're doing the specific things that are right for us.
Yeah, I've tried to quiet my mind in one of those high intensity sessions, Lindsey, and all I hear is my body shouting at me, telling me this is childish and stupid, and I need to stop. So I'm much like you. I get lots of energy from the long ones, but I'm going to ask this question because it actually happened in the last week, Lindsey, where you talk about going back and looking at the times that you've done, and maybe you don't have time, but if you have been running for a while. But what about somebody who's coming back to running? And this is a prime example of somebody that I bumped into at our running club this week. The guy was super fit 10 years ago. He's now into his mid 50s and hasn't done anything for the last 10 years. So in his mind, and when I say super fit, the guy was running ultra marathons, he was doing Ironman triathlons, he was super fit and hasn't done anything for the last 10 years. He's put on a bit of weight, and in his mind, he's thinking his early 40s and still able to do that, but he's really struggling with our 5K at the running club. What are some of the sort of key individualization factors that would influence a training plan for someone like him who maybe has had past injuries or is coming back, his current fitness level is not what it used to be? How do you take that into account in this sort of situation?
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
So the more patient that individual can be, the greater their chance of reaching anything resembling their previous heights were. The problem is that in the short term, that can be quite frustrating, especially for like high performance people that have an idea in their mind of how they should be performing right now. So a person like that is far better controlled by heart rate and doing something along the lines of a full maffetone inspired math type of training where we really limit um, their intensity. And the reason for that, quite simply, is because there's such a low risk of getting injured if you train like that. And if you can train like that for 4 to 6 weeks, just to give yourself enough stress and strengthening of those muscle groups, that when I ask you to go out and do a 3,000 meter or a 5K, 3 mile, fairly hard effort, I wouldn't go all out in the first one, but if you've got a good consistency over 4 to 6 weeks, then we can send you out. You can run a hard 5K, 3 mile, and we can go right. Based on that, now we can start a plan that's a little bit more specific in terms of a goal outcome, whether that be improving your 5K or whatever larger goal that you've got in your mind that you're trying to achieve. But we also now have some data from you as an individual so that we can individualize that training over the next 4 to 8 week cycle, where we do implement a slightly more specific training plan. And then by the time we get to the end of that cycle, we'll be sitting on 12 to 16 weeks, and we'll have a great concept of where this guy's at, where his strengths and weaknesses are now, how he's responding to the intensities that we've created. And we can just keep reevaluating that every 4 to 8 weeks to see where we can adjust and how we can change those intensities to keep that individualized to him.
Yeah, Lindsey, it's so interesting because like I can sense his frustration because I've been there. Like I'm just thinking of my experience over the last 2 years. I ran the London Marathon back. It's almost 2 years ago now, actually. It was in what are we now? 2025. So it was 2023. I ran the London Marathon from zero base. I literally went from nothing to running London Marathon in about 3 months, which is probably not advisable. But if I think back to how I was training back then, I was walking 9 minutes, running 1. So very little running, and I've just slowly built up. And in the last 2 years, I've taken an hour and a half off my marathon time from that London Marathon effort to the last marathon that I did. And initially it was super frustrating because like I was in the same mindset that it's like I remember what it was like 10 years ago when I was running marathons in 420 and doing them for fun. And then it was like really hard work, and all of a sudden you're doing 6.5 hour marathons. But if you're just consistent, and we spoke about consistency in last week's episode, if you're just consistent and you sort of are patient with yourself and not too hard on yourself, things do fall into place. It's almost like you flip a switch, and now I think, man, how did I ever let myself get to that point where I wasn't able to run 10Ks? And it's just a bit of patience and self-care and self-love, I think, gets you into this sort of space. You mentioned coming back using something like a math methods training plan or low heart rate training. What role does heart rate play in individualizing your training for an over 50s runner? Not necessarily for somebody who's starting out from an injury, but in general, how can we use heart rate to really maximize this process?
It's just a really good way of the individual seeing what's happening inside of them, and it's a good objective measure of what is truly easy and not easy, because we do lose a little bit of perspective. We often talk about the talk test. You must be able to talk when you're running along. But even that, you can talk and breathe a little bit heavily and convince yourself that, because I'm talking. But when it comes to heart rate, that individual response is exactly that. It is individual. So there isn't a one size fits all. What's great about using something like a math is that all we're doing is ensuring that you are well below threshold by using a math test. And there are certainly better ways of getting optimal improvement, because what we do see occasionally with math is that there isn't actually enough stimulus to get the improvement that we're looking for. And so like really pushing yourself hard on something like a 5K or 3 mile is a better way of getting an individualized heart rate threshold estimation, and then to work on making sure that you are, around 80% of threshold heart rates on your easy runs. And then you kind of get the optimal stimulus and improvement, but we make sure that you are definitely running easy enough that you're keeping your risk of injury low. But very important, we are optimizing the improvements of your cardiovascular function, which in turn is going to make you more efficient. So yeah, it does require that you use a chest strap and not wrist. Wrist is okay, and especially if you're not like a high-end type A, top of the table achiever, your wrist-based stuff will probably be okay, particularly for just helping you to limit your intensity on the easy runs. But I do think it's important that somewhere in your first 4 to 6, you do enough running or run walking, as in your case, on like a start out right type of thing, where we slowly build up the running and reduce the walking. But we do at least one of those two approaches, which ensure super easy running till 4 to 6 weeks in, where we can then get a handle on, are you someone with a naturally high heart rate, naturally low heart rate, etc., and then peg those intensities for you as Brad, and that you don't now try and follow my heart rate guidelines, because they're not going to be the same.
Absolutely. Lindsey, what's the best way for runners to assess, like self-assess or tweak training plans if they feel like what they're doing is not working for them?
Yeah, an honest reflection, and if they are training, and I think this is the important thing. So if you are training consistently, okay, I think that's quite important, because I'd hate for someone to go out and do anything that puts them at risk. So if you are starting out, I would say the slower you start up and build up, the more sustainable this is going to be for you. But if you are someone who's really training hard, trying a lot of things, struggling to improve, but never mind struggling to improve, you just really are almost feel like every time you go out and do a hard run, you are slower than you were the last time. I would take those performances and have a look at those performances, and then have a look at average heart rate and average pace for, and again, a 3 to 5K is best, but you can use a half marathon and a marathon and extrapolate things from those performances. And then we've obviously got a really nice tool that you can plug into on the Coach Parry app, but there are other tools on the internet where you can go and have an estimated threshold pace and an estimated heart rate pace. And then it's to go, right, the biggest single improvement I can make is to ensure that 3 out of 4 training sessions are run easy at 80% of threshold. And I think if you go out and do that, that's the single easiest lever to pull. And if you get that right, you're going to start feeling better within 2 weeks of changing that training. And then the second lever, which is just so easy to pull, is just to make sure that you aren't running 6 to 7 days a week, and that you're running 4 to 5 days a week, and just giving your body that opportunity to recover from those training sessions.
Yeah, and then I think the risk as well, Lindsey, is once you do start feeling better, not to fall back into the old trap of doing more and harder because you're feeling better. It's working. So keep doing it because it is working. So that is brilliant. So don't forget, if you do want to find out a little bit more about our Faster Beyond 50 training plans, where all of this stuff is baked in, all you need to do is click on the link that is in the description to this podcast. You can also click on the link in the description on YouTube as well. Click straight through there. We'd love to help you. And like I said at the start of the first session that we did on this, is that there's quite a large spectrum with regards to individualization. So from just grabbing a generic training plan off the internet where there's zero individualization, right through to one-on-one coaching, there is a nice sort of gap in the middle, which I think our Faster Beyond 50 training frameworks really do fill that gap, where you can individualize it for your individual ability, but still get access to one-on-one coaching, chatting to coaches in forums, coaching calls, and that sort of thing to really make it work for you. So definitely go check those out. Lindsey, as always, great to catch up. I love those 3 levers, and hopefully it does help people just really point them in the right direction and get the most out of the training that they are doing, so that they are training smarter and not harder as they get into their 50s, 60s, and beyond. Until next week, from myself, Brad Nannels, and Lindsey Parry, it's cheers.